Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our topical conversation this evening. We have really an exciting program tonight. John Shartle has done extensive work in UFOs, ETs, interstellar travel, interdimensional travel. And this evening, we have a wonderful person that John has been able to do some historical work on and finds to be a very credible person to give us information on perhaps some of the things that the government has been withholding from us. So I don't know too much more than that, John, except to welcome you, to thank you for all that you do for Now Creations, chairman of our members committee and co-host with our Cosmic Citizens Committee. So welcome, John. Let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Vince, for that very much. Am I coming through? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, very good. All right, well, I'm going to start with a couple preliminaries, and I would just like to ask simple show of hands, if you don't mind. I thought I'd take a little survey as we get started this morning. And if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But I'm curious of the group here tonight. If you're on camera and if you're off camera, maybe you could raise your hand in the chat or whatever. I'm just curious how many of us here believe that there is intelligent life somewhere in the universe. Just raise your hand, okay? And how many of you folks believe that there may be intelligent life here on Earth that is not human, that maybe came from somewhere else? Okay, I believe that. There's no right or wrong to this. I just thought I'd take a simple little survey. So most of us, I think, most of us have a sense of that. And I think it would be surprising maybe to some folks that that's kind of a common view today. It wasn't always a common view in the United States or in the world. And it may be especially surprising to you, as it was to me, that that the Vatican has weighed in on this on a couple of occasions without explicitly coming out and saying it does or doesn't exist. I have a couple of quotes here I'd just like to provide. This is from the Vatican astronomer several years ago, being interviewed. And he said, "How can we rule out that life may have developed elsewhere? Just as we consider earthly creatures as brothers and sisters, why should we not talk about extraterrestrial brothers? It would still be a part of creation." And then he goes on to say, who are we to limit the creativity of God? And then, and this is, by the way, this is going to factor in a little bit later in this story, so buckle up. And then recently the Pope said, kind of jokingly, but in the context of everything we're going to talk about tonight, maybe not so jokingly, that if extraterrestrials showed up on Earth, he'd be glad to baptize them. So, you know, I think he said that as a little bit of a joke, but maybe not. I don't know. So with that being said, let's move forward into the presentation. First of all, Vince, I want to thank you and Now Creations and everybody here tonight for participating in this. I just want to start with a few disclaimers that I am a very interested person. I've done a lot of research in my life. I've read a lot of books. I've done a lot. This has just been an area of study for me since I was a kid. And I find it interesting, and it continues to become more interesting. Having said that, though, I'm not an expert. I'm just a person who's deeply interested. And we're going to talk about extraterrestrial life. I don't know what they are. I don't know. I don't have any idea. I don't think anybody does. But I do think they're real, whatever they are. So that's the second disclaimer. And the third is this. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I think there's a lot of very interesting and compelling information out there that it would be wise for all of us to be paying attention to. What beliefs you draw, what conclusions you draw from it, that's your own. I think that everybody who's hearing this information has their own interpretation of it. I have mine. You're welcome to make yours. So I'm not here to convince you of anything one way or the other, just to present the information as I have seen it presented. So there's an expression I like. I was putting this conversation together, and there's so much information. I mean, you know, where do you even begin with this topic? It's huge. And so I fell back on an expression I used to use when I was in the work world, and that is, don't build me a clock, just tell me what time it is. So I'm going to try and avoid all of the many things that go into this and just get to the essentials here. And if anybody wants me to build a clock for them, I put my email in the chat. I'd be welcome to build a clock for you on this topic, because I enjoy doing that, and I'd be glad to direct you to additional information, if you're curious. Yeah, so it's a little bit challenging trying to condense this down, because there just is a lot, and it seems to be a moving target. As time has gone on in recent days, especially, it seems to be just building and building. I want to reference in our last Cosmic Citizens report, which I think came out at the end of May of this year. I was chuckling at this a little earlier today. I had the privilege of doing the report, and I said, the question remains, though, are we alone? I still believe the answer is no, that is, we're not alone. And there is an ever-growing body of evidence that supports this position, et cetera, et cetera. I have no firsthand knowledge in this regard, but I do maintain a variety of trusted sources based on books, journals, and other materials. These sources all indicate there will be some significant confirmation of visitations by non-Earth intelligence within the next few years, and possibly sooner. The issue has become too big and complex to remain obscured. And wow, did that happen? So here's where the story begins, but a little bit of history first. As I mentioned, over time, the popular belief around UFOs has shifted. In 1947, in July of 1947, probably the most famous UFO incident happened in Roswell, New Mexico. And what happened was there was a crash of some kind of a vehicle in the desert outside of Roswell, New Mexico, and a rancher went out to find it to see what crashed in his area, near his home, and he found a debris field of peculiar and strange materials. So he called the Army. The Army airfield is located in Roswell, New Mexico, and at the time it was the only nuclear armed military base. So they came out, they collected some of the material, took it back, and the newspaper the next day said to the effect that the Army had found a flying disc, which of course can you imagine picking up the paper and that's what you read? Well, the very next day, wouldn't you know it, that they retracted that story and they said, oh, just kidding, it was a weather balloon. And they provided a variety of pictures and said, false alarm, nothing to see here, everybody go home. And so Roswell kind of went away for a long time. But something happened there, and everybody knows something happened there, and it wasn't really revisited until the 80s, but that's a whole other story. So Roswell, 1947, sort of starts the modern era of UFOs. Then in 1952, there was a very famous 2 weekends of UFOs buzzing the Capitol. If you've not heard about it, I encourage you to look it up. They have no explanation for it. There were craft seen around the Capitol, around the White House. They scrambled fighters. The fighter jets couldn't track these things, couldn't keep pace with them, and then they disappeared. And again, the military came out and said, "Oh, it was just, weather phenomena, nothing to see here." But that probably wasn't the case, to be candid with you. So these things have been going on, and there are numerous cases to mention. There are hundreds of cases like that, and thousands of personal cases where people have seen things, reported things, and kind of the MO has been to treat these people like, the quote is, tinfoil hat crazies. Oh, you're crazy. That doesn't exist. But that was in an era before phone cameras and camcorders. And in the last 30 years, things have really taken a dramatic shift because everybody has a little bit of a video camera right in their hand. And so these things are being seen more and reported more. And, there have been also in the meantime, a lot of really good, smart people who weren't afraid to be tagged with you're just the UFO kook, badge. They've just gone ahead and said, that's fine, I'm going to report this anyway. And I just want to mention a few of them. They run the spectrum. They run from reporters to psychologists to people in Congress. And a few of them are J. Allen Hynek, who was one of the first reviewers of UFO information, who went from trying to dissuade people from believing in them to over time saying, yeah, there's something here. I can't lie anymore. There's really something to this. A gentleman named Jacques Vallée, Lou Elizondo more recently, John Mack, Christopher Mellon, Dr. Gary Nolan, Leslie Keene, and Ralph Blumenthal are two terrific reporters. And last but not least, I want to mention Senator Harry Reid. Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader for a long time, and he was responsible. He believed in this. He believed there was something going on when other people did not. And he chose to push for funding for research in this areas. And again, that's really a condensed version of it, but I think that's kind of the essence of it. So I think we're really in an era right now of cultural conversation as well as official conversation that just didn't exist years ago. And that more or less, that little brief little history kind of brings us to the subject of the topic tonight. And as I said earlier, buckle up because this is a bit of a weird story. So we're going to talk about a gentleman named David Grusch. If you haven't heard about David Grusch, I would suggest that you probably will be hearing about him going forward. I think he will, and when the history is written of this time, I think he will be a pivotal figure, and we will know a great deal about him. But let me tell you what we can talk about David Grusch. David Grusch is I'm just going to read some of this. David Grusch is a 37-year-old Air Force officer. He's a highly decorated combat veteran and intelligence officer. And most recently, he served as an intelligence liaison to the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is an office within the Pentagon that is tasked with looking at strange things in the sky as well as things in the sea. What are these things? And he served as an intelligence liaison to that group. He previously worked with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. They are basically two of our the United States' premier spy agencies. There's no other way to say it. He was a spy, and he worked for those agencies. So he was tasked to this, working with this task force to basically flesh out what's going on with these things. So, and I also want to say, it's not an understatement to say that he was trusted with our nation's most important secrets. He's a no joke kind of guy. He's not just a random guy who's making some wild claims. He's a real deal American hero and patriot, and a guy who I believe is entirely credible. So in April of 2023, this year, he retired from military service. And in early May of this year, he gave an interview to journalists Leslie Keene and Ralph Blumenthal, which was published in the Debrief, which is an online newspaper that orients towards science, UFOs, and other things. And basically, and he also did at the same time, right after that, he did an on-camera interview with Ross Coulthart, who was an Australian journalist, a very credible journalist. He did work with the Australian version of 60 Minutes. He's done a lot of reporting. He's a very credible guy. I've read his book, and I find him to be really smart and very credible. So he gave an on-camera interview as well as a paper interview. And basically, he made a number of claims, which I'm just going to detail to you right now.
And John, I'm going to ask you just to take that nice and slow for us, because I know we're going to want some notes and so on.
Okay. So essentially what Grusch is claiming, this is kind of the overarching piece of the puzzle, is that the United States has been working a UFO crash retrieval program since the 1930s and 40s. In other words, the United States government has been involved in some way, shape, or form in collecting crashed UFOs, including alien bodies. And he says that we have, his phrase is, we have quite a number of these craft, and we have also collected alien bodies, because he said, you know, when things crash, sometimes you have dead bodies. It was that simple. He states that this program essentially started in the 1930s, which is sooner than, is earlier than the Roswell crash that I mentioned earlier. But apparently there was a UFO crash, and this is pretty well documented. This isn't speculation. There was a crash in Magenta, Italy in the 1930s. Yeah. And Benito Mussolini tasked his team, his fascist regime, with collecting the debris from this thing and storing it away. And they had no idea what it was. In fact, the Italians thought it was war hardware from France or England or the United States. He had no idea what it was. They just thought it was a new weapon. So they collected it and they stored it. And in 1944, when the war was coming to an end, now this is the story as it's being told, as the war was coming to an end, the United States was contacted by the Pope, which I guess would have been Pius XII at that time, back in the 40s. I don't know who the Pope was at that time. But at any rate, the Pope was aware of this. The Vatican was aware of this crash, made the United States aware of this, and the United States retrieved this material from the Italian government, or took it by force, I'm not sure what. But that came into our possession at that time. And essentially the crash retrieval program began in the 30s. And subsequent to that, there was the Roswell crash in 1947, about 10 years later. And there have been several since then, all of which have been dismissed as it's nothing to see here. It was a plane crash. It was a meteor, that sort of thing. So he says that we're in possession of these retrieved craft. We're in possession of the bodies, and that this has been hidden from the American public, paid for by taxpayer dollars through black budget programs. And if you're not familiar with the term black budget, it just basically means money that's hidden within different departments. Typically, you think of it with the Defense Department when it's money that seems like it's being spent for one thing and it's really being spent for another thing. So that's how this crash retrieval program is being funded. That's the essence of it. Now, there are so many implications to that. I mean, the implication is, wow, we have craft, we have bodies. What are we doing with them? Why haven't we been told about them? So Grusch has gone on. He's a whistleblower now. He has protected whistleblower status. And he has reported these claims to Congress. He has, even as we sit here tonight, he has reported these claims to Congress. He has also reported them to the Inspector General of the Defense Department, who found his claims to be urgent and credible. That's no small thing. It's not being dismissed. One of the other things that Grusch claimed, he was asked, basically, where did they come from? What they're from outer space. Where did they come from? He said they may not be coming from space. He said they may be transdimensional. From higher dimensions, he said they may be existing right here alongside us on Earth in a variety of different dimensions. Now, bear in mind that Grusch is I believe he has his master's degree in physics. That's what he went to college for. He's a Pittsburgher, by the way. Family didn't have a lot of money, blue collar family. He went to school through his military service, got a degree in physics. So his comment was, we don't know where they're coming from, but it's not necessarily a given that they've come from another planet. They could be just existing on another plane of existence transdimensionally, which kind of blew me away, but I think all of this blows me away. So in a nutshell, as a result of this guy's claims, a lot of things have been happening at the official level. There are a number of senators and members of Congress who are taking him very seriously, not just him, but other whistleblowers. They have been invited and they have been given immunity to come forward with any information they might have. Many of these whistleblowers, including Grusch, have signed non-disclosure agreements which bind them under penalty of law to not reveal anything. They have been given immunity from this in many cases, and they're working to give them absolutely full immunity. The Congress is, I'm talking about. The people involved in that it's a bipartisan effort, so it's not a partisan thing, which is really interesting. We have Senator Rubio on the Republican side, Senator Gillibrand on the Democratic side, working hand in hand to get this information from these whistleblowers so that it could be reviewed, analyzed, and determined whether it's going to be, how it's going to be presented to the American people. In Congress, we have Congressman Burkett, we have Congressman Comer, we have Congressman Carson. Again, a bipartisan group of people who are all taking this very, very seriously. So let me tell you this. I've been making notes even today to kind of update things. So where we are with this right now, just today I heard there are actually going to be hearings on this in the House of Representatives on July 26th. That's brand new information, came out, I think, last night. July 26th, there are going to be hearings, and these whistleblowers are going to be called forward to provide testimony publicly on what they know. Now, some things I'm sure they're not going to be able to talk about publicly, but they're being encouraged to talk publicly as best they can. Some of the implications of this are that the United States doesn't have, that the US government is not still in possession of these materials and these bodies, that they have actually handed them off to aerospace companies such as Lockheed Martin. So one of the things that you could do, this is very government speak kind of thing, but there's the Freedom of Information Act, which says the government has an obligation to tell you something if you ask for it, basically, if it doesn't compromise national security. Well, one way around that is to give the information that somebody might be asking about to a private company to hold. The company doesn't have any obligation to tell you about that information. So they can say, we don't know, and they can be honest because the company has the information. So it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but I don't want to bog you down in that. But the other thing that's important is that the legislation that's being crafted for the 2024 Defense Authorization Act includes language, and I won't bore you down with this, but basically what it says in the language, this is the law, this will be the law, is that any contractor who is aware of or has possession of materials or bodies of exotic origin, that's a new term that's being used, instead of saying aliens or from another planet, the term exotic origin is being used, that Congress is to be made aware of it within 60 days and all materials are to be turned over within 180 days. I mean, that is unbelievable. A year from now, we could be sitting here with an entirely different perspective on our place in the universe as it relates to, alien craft and alien beings. So that's what's going on right now. A couple of things I want to just point out. Again, Grusch is a very, very credible person. When he came forward, there was a real effort on the part of some media outlets and some debunkers, as they call them, to try and say, well, who is he? This guy is a highly decorated military officer. And the interesting thing about it is that a whole raft of other highly decorated military officers came out behind him to say, if this guy is telling you this, you better take it to the bank because he's not a guy to fool around. He's telling you the truth, which I believe is encouraging, even as it's shocking that it's kind of breaking down that way. So, what this all brings us to is that I think that we're on the brink of a complete revision of our understanding of the universe, of consciousness, of life, and our purpose in our existence. And, Vince, I'm just going to put you on notice here. I'm going to ask you for your take on this because you're the man with so much wisdom around these kinds of things. And I'm really curious because I don't know. There's this term that I've heard, and I really think I've been dealing with it. This term called ontological shock, which essentially means that your whole perspective on what you thought was real changes in some really profound way that you didn't see coming. Think about those of us who have had children. You're going to be a parent. You think you're going to have, that's a kid in there. That baby's going to be out there. But when that kid shows up and you're holding it, it's a very different thing. The comparison has been given to when the Native Americans, who were just living their lives in South America and Central America, and I guess North America too, looked out on the horizon and saw Spanish ships. They had no frame of reference for that. They had no understanding of that. When these things showed up on the horizon, it shifted everything about their lives and the way they lived. Unfortunately, didn't turn out so great for them, and it doesn't have to be that way with this, but it is suggestive of a profound shift that's coming, I believe, in all of our perspectives. And I've been asking myself that. I've asked myself that many times, but with this new revelation, it just seems like, oh man, that's not something that's going to happen in years. That's something that's going to happen really soon in some way. I don't know how it's going to come out, but it's going to happen in some way. So Grusch was asked to, why has this been hidden? Why would the government go to such lengths to hide this information from the American public and in fact the world? And his answer is simple and probably what you could guess. His term was for feudal dominance. If we're in possession of craft and materials that are thousands of years ahead of what we have now, and systems of travel and transport and energy systems that are just beyond our even wildest understanding, and we have them in our possession, why would we tell our rivals in the world? I know that's a very simplistic thing, and wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to think that way? Maybe we won't think that way someday. But at the core right now, that's his statement, that's the reason why it's been hidden. Feudal dominance. We don't want to let other people know what we have in our possession.
John, did you say, what was the word preceding dominance?
Feudal, F-E-U-D-A-L, feudal
Okay.
dominance.
I just wasn't sure. Not futile, but feudal dominance.
Feudal.
Yeah, we want to be in charge.
Right, we want to be in charge. The other thing he said is that this will have significant direct ramifications for religious and spiritual things, for religious and spiritual beliefs. We don't know what that will be. Perhaps some religious traditions and spiritual traditions will just embrace this and incorporate it. For some, though, and I can think of some groups that might be directly challenged and threatened and fearful about this, which would, of course, cause some cultural and civic unrest, and that could be from very small to very large, based on what we find out, frankly. So, in a nutshell, this is a big revelation, and it's coming from an entirely credible source. Over the years, we've heard from lots of different people. Again, and I'll be happy to, if you want more information, I can send you more information. But there was a guy named Bob Lazar back in the late '80s who said that he worked as a contractor for the government, and he had access to these things. He saw them with his hands. He worked on them. He saw craft, and that they weren't disclosed by the government. Not everybody, but many people thought he was just a crackpot. And maybe he is a crackpot. I don't know, but it's sure seeming like what he indicated back in 1989 is kind of a parallel to what's being disclosed by this very credible military officer. Well, now retired military officer. So I would encourage you to do a couple of things. And again, I'll send you the information, but a couple of things I would encourage you to do. There's the debrief.com. It's an online, as I mentioned it earlier, it's an online news source. They focus mostly on science, technology, and they cover a lot of stuff related to UFOs. That's where the initial story was printed on June 5th, I believe. And then I would encourage you to check out, if you haven't ever heard of it, there's an emerging news station called News Nation, not to be confused with Newsmax. And you can get the app, you can find it online, the interview. It's a 41-minute interview where he details everything I just told you, probably much more eloquently than I'm doing it justice. And you can watch it for yourself. You can see David Grusch, you can hear what he has to say. I listened to it again today just to kind of refresh myself on it, and I was just astonished again that I was hearing what I was hearing. But those two things I would really encourage you to do. And if you need help with that, I'd be happy to send it to you.
Would you just repeat those, John? Excuse me, please. Would you repeat those for those who want to take some notes, and just nice and slow?
Yep. Let me make sure. I'm just going to make sure it's
debrief.com.
Debrief. .com.
And News Nation.
Yes, I'm making sure I'm giving you the right.
Okay.
I'm whether it's debrief, it's the debrief.org. I apologize.
Okay.
And it's actually the debrief.org. All those words. And then News Nation is the outlet. The news outlet where he did the interview. So just to wrap this up a little bit, what we're seeing right now is after that happened, there were crickets from mainstream media. The New York Times, nobody was covering it. It was just like it just kind of went into the trash bin, which is really curious. Now I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll just put that out there, and everybody, that was kind of the topic of conversation. Why isn't mainstream media covering this? And I don't know why, but what I can tell you is in the past several days, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, has pushed for legislation. The hearings are coming on the 26th, so they're now starting to cover it. They're doing it very carefully because they don't want to be, caught up in, I guess, called tinfoil hatters or something. I don't know. I think it's too late for that. But they're being very cautious in their approach to covering this, but they are now starting to cover it. And I think it's just going to get bigger. And I think in the next few weeks, it's going to be huge. When the hearings happen on the 26th, I think that's going to be very revelatory. And then I think it's just going to be a matter of time after that till we have a really significant disclosure. One of my trusted sources that I referred to in the last Cosmic Citizens report believes that it's a matter of weeks after the hearing that we will get something very, very large and official from the government in terms of a statement about all of this. So I know that's a lot of stuff, a lot of things, and I really appreciate it. It's one of those things, I kind of live in this world, and so it's all very familiar to me, and I wanted to make it sort of digestible for everybody here. I'd be happy to answer questions. I appreciate your time tonight. This is, again, I think it's a very important subject. And I think we should all be digging in a little bit on this because I think it's going to affect all of us, whether we like it or not, in the next weeks to months, I'll say. And with that, Vince, I'll turn it over to you and say thank you for this time tonight. Any questions I'm happy to answer. Any curiosities I would be happy to answer as well.
Yeah, and I have you as a co-host as well, John. Let me just ask one thing first. Are those hearings going to be public?
Yes.
They will be public hearings.
That is the word right now, that they're going to be public hearings.
Thank you. John, I've made you co-host, but I can call on people. Or do you have a full screen, or is it easier for me to do?
I'm on my iPad. I think I have, let's see, I got 12 people here.
Okay, I'll do it then, because we have about 20 some on my screen. Andrew and Marie, and unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, John, for presenting that information in a nice, concise form, because there's so much to deal with. I followed this issue for decades, and I want to add just a couple of things and also ask your input on it and your thoughts. Another person you didn't mention who's an excellent resource is Stephen Greer.
Oh, yes.
He's a surgeon, and 30 years ago he was inspired to delve into this, and he's one of the most credible people I see on this. And he's done lots with Congress. He's done National Press Club gatherings, including one last month that he did. But his theory, to go back to what you said a few minutes ago about why this has been kept from people, is his theory, which I find credible, is that along with these discoveries in the 30s and 40s, were also the discoveries of free energy, essentially that extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, whatever you want to call them, have this capability.
Excuse me, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to speak just a little slower.
Sorry, Vince.
Yeah, that's okay. So I want everyone to hear just a little slower.
My New Jersey roots coming out.
Yes.
So his theory is that part of the reason this hasn't come out is actually a corporate fossil fuel connection that these industries, which have been obviously massive in our history of influences in the past century, have pressured the government to not disclose these things, because as you disclose this information, de facto, the information about free energy will essentially come out and completely eliminating their sector. So that's one of the things I just want to throw out there, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. The second thing I wanted to say also is one of the most encouraging things to me about this topic is, especially now with Ukraine and people's high level of concern about nuclear warfare, is the many incidents over the past few decades, very credible incidents of essentially, to make it short, extraterrestrials involving themselves in our nuclear facilities, both here and in Russia, in very stark ways that make the communication is you cannot use, you will not be able to use these nuclear weapons because we will stop you from using them, because the universe is affected negatively when you use these weapons on Earth. Essentially, they've shut down various stations, various silos at different times to send that message. So I wanted to just also throw that out there, because to me, that's an encouraging piece of this whole picture. So that's that for me for now.
John,
Yeah. Would you like me to weigh in on that?
yes, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Stephen Greer, I failed to mention him. You know, Greer, I like Greer. I like Greer very much. And I think he's a really smart guy, and I have followed him. You know, and I say this without any judgment, he's a bit of a polarizing figure for some, because all of the things that you said are true. And I think there are some people who don't want to hear that. You know, the sort of the military, well, let's call it the military industrial complex, doesn't gain anything from an attitude of free energy, and certainly our corporate system does not. You know, one of the things that has been talked about by Greer and others is that these vehicles, let's call them vehicles, craft, or whatever, just transcend anything that we can understand in terms of how they're powered. And I mean, it's not like they're nuclear, let's say. They're beyond our understanding. And I read one report, a very credible report, of somebody who had, who was in the presence of one of these craft. And on the outside, now I don't know that this is true, I wasn't there, but again, you know, this is stuff that's kind of emerging. On the outside, the thing, let's say, was 15 feet long. And when the person entered the craft, it was as big as a stadium. So like the whole idea of dimensionality is gone. Our understanding of physics and chemistry and all that kind of just goes out the window with this stuff. And so to your point, yeah, that's one of the things, is that these entities, whomever they are, have access to things like unlimited, free, clean energy. Now, what does ExxonMobil, and I don't want to get into conspiracy, I don't know, but it does make sense. Why would ExxonMobil want any of this stuff out there if it's going to take away from their bottom line or destroy them as a company? So there are many, many things to consider. I don't know. Certainly something to consider. The nuclear interventions that you mentioned that's not speculation. Those are true, as you know, Andrew. Yeah, there were a couple of occasions back in the 60s and 70s, well documented, well categorized, where all of a sudden there was a ball or some kind of a light source outside of the gate of these nuclear facility. Malmstrom, I think, is one of them in North Dakota, I believe. And effectively, the entire nuclear system was shut down entirely. They didn't know what was going on. It was a panic. And so to your point, yeah, I think that, I mean, the understanding is that there was a message here of, hey guys, don't do this. Don't do this. And not only don't do this, we can stop you from doing this. And we'd rather do this by sending you a simple message as opposed to something a little more drastic. I don't know. You know, in fact, I'll tell you right now, even as we're talking, my iPad is kind of stacked on some books because it gets to the right height. And one of them is UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. And he was one of the people that was involved in all of that. So yeah, that's a really important thing and definitely something to consider. It's just a great area of speculation. That's my take.
Thank you, Andrew, for the questions. Thank you, John. Let's open it up to questions. Any questions on your mind? Anything that you just want to bring up tonight in relation to the topic? Tony?
Yeah, fascinating discussion. Some 8-10 months ago, John, you sent me a link to Dr. Gary Nolan interview.
Mm-hmm.
There was one that followed that more recently, but that one of back in August interview it was a more an introduction to how he got involved. And that's when I was really affected personally by that, with his credibility. He was, it's an amazing story. You can fill in the details, but he had firsthand information because he was asked, I'll just get you started maybe. He was asked by the CIA to investigate people that have become ill, that had literal damage, physical damage to them. And he's a very credible blood biologist, a doctor who is multi-patents for blood examination machines. So the CIA came to him to ask him to try to determine what might have caused these illnesses in individuals. And he was given privy information. These are individuals that ran into unidentified objects, and that very credible. I would highly recommend that. But John, maybe you can mention a little bit about Gary. I think I felt like he was pretty credible guy.
Well, Gary Nolan is, I think this is one of the things that we're seeing right now. This topic has shifted from people who just have opinions about things to people who are incredibly informed. And Gary Nolan is one of them. I think I shared, Vince, with you a recent video he did. He was interviewed at the SALT conference in New York. And basically Nolan, Tony, you hit the nail on the head. He's a pathologist. He's a forensic pathologist. In fact, I think he's the chairman, and I believe it's Stanford. I believe it's at Stanford. And he was approached by the CIA, other intelligence officials, to look at basically, human flesh and human beings. What happened to these people? Because it was kind of a mystery. And he actually thought that he was being pranked initially. He thought he was being pranked when they showed up and said, we're with the government and we need your help with this. He was kind of looking for the cameras and, where's Alan Funt? And it wasn't the case. They were really asking for help. As a result of that, he, determined that a lot of these injuries and a lot of these things that were being seen, and they never said to him straight out, oh, these are from, craft or aliens or whatever. He kind of pieced it together. And, these things were, really incredible injuries that you just wouldn't get through normal warfare, normal injuries. So it piqued his curiosity, and he's become very involved in this. And he's really one of the, I think, most, I keep using the word credible, but that's really important in this realm. He's a very credible advocate for this topic. And, in a nutshell, he was interviewed recently in New York, and he was asked, something to the effect of, do you think that aliens exist or something like that? And he said, I think they're here right now, very confidently. Like, his research has led him to believe, like, there is no question that this is happening right now. And, he didn't really elaborate on that, but I think that there's just a body of evidence that the folks who are still out there going, nothing to see here, they just can't hold that up anymore. It's the dam has broken. And I think we're going to find out a lot of weird stuff. And I think we're also going to find out some things that aren't true too. So there's going to be a lot of speculation. Everybody's going to have an opinion. We don't know what that's going to be. But Nolan, if you want to do some of your own digging, check out Gary Nolan. I'd be happy to send you his most recent interview from the SALT conference in New York. But I will tell you that as much as I've dug into this topic, I enjoy it, and I find it a little frightening also, because I don't know what I like, being in control of my domain, or at least kidding myself that I'm in control of things. I know that's false, but this really makes me feel a little out of control because I don't have any bearing for this.
John, when
yes,
Dr. Nolan was doing research on injuries, what type of injuries?
a lot of burns.
And where did
Individuals, if I can interject,
go ahead,
individuals had brain damage. He was given CAT scan records and that showed brain damage that came when they approached an object. That was one I heard.
Yeah. Very strange, unusual injuries that people acquired, normal people, some military people who said that they had encounters with craft beings. Now, this can go a lot of different ways. Some people will make the judgment. The military inclined folks will say, well, there you go, they're hostile. You see right there, they're hostile. And then there's another side of the discussion that says, no, they're not hostile, they're peace loving. And who knows? I mean, as Grusch has said, there have been some documented, this is in his interview, there have been some documented dark things that have happened, but who knows the context of those things? We don't know the context of that. Maybe that was done in self-defense. Maybe, who knows? It doesn't seem to me, and this is just my personal belief, this is kind of along the lines of what Greer would say, Dr. Greer. If they wanted to blow us up, they would have done it already. I mean, it's that simple. They could, but maybe it's not that simple. Maybe it's not, maybe it's more complex than that. And it probably is. But yeah, there were injuries, brain injuries, tissue damage that just couldn't be explained through normal mechanisms that Nolan was investigating. And that's how he got hooked.
Excuse me, John. And then all of these people had some kind of UFO encounter or ET encounter. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, that is the bottom line. Yes.
That's what we want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of that. And being a forensic pathologist, head of the department, you have a pretty credible witness about something that occurred that was unexplainable in
Right.
traditional medicine. That's what
And
we
that's what he's still doing. He's still doing that. He's still chairman of the
Yes.
department.
understand. Mhm. Any other comments? Andrew, go ahead.
To speak to the last point that John said, in the chat, I put the name of a woman who's been doing research on this for decades, Linda Moulton Howe. She's one of the most credible, respected people in this. Stanford grad, actually was working in television until she came across mutilated cattle in the 70s, and did several documentaries on this. Anyway, long story short, she has a great website. She's one of the most credible folks on this. And she, from all of her research, which includes hundreds of people, military whistleblowers, others who've come to her secretly, she has concluded that the answer to your question about are they good or bad is actually both. And she has a different category. She calls them some tall whites, some Nordics, et cetera, some reptilians. And this goes down a pretty deep rabbit hole, but she has concluded that there are a panoply of beings working here on Earth, some interdimensionally, some from other planets in this dimension. And there is a somewhat of a conflict that is going on, and has been going on for a long time between these beings. And that in general, there are more light beings working with us than dark beings, but that there are both. And then that's why you get these stories, as John alluded to, of some negative encounters, but also many positive encounters. So
the teaching is that the Earth might be in the middle of these larger encounters.
yes,
Right.
and or some kind of experimental place. And going back to our old years, Vince, Conversations with God, Neil Donald Walsh references highly evolved beings.
Yes.
And that's one of his core, I think it's book 3.
Book 3, yes.
Where he raises this. And I do believe that the light beings could also just be referred to as highly evolved beings from whatever dimension they're from.
Sure, absolutely.
Agreed. It's a great mystery. There is a scene. Let's see here. In what is it? Independence Day, which is, take that for what it's worth. It was a blockbuster movie a long time ago, but basically it posits that there's an alien invasion, and there's this scene in the movie where all the crazy stuff that everybody's talked about, that everybody has been made to believe they're crazy, suddenly everybody's going like, oh, they're not the crazies anymore. That this is this was real all along. And I think about that from time to time, because I don't think all of it's real, but so I say that to say this is also part of the Grusch statement, that the United States, let me ask you this before I even back up. Andrew, did you see the interview?
Gary Nolan's interview?
No, with the David Grusch.
I haven't yet. I'm going to look it up. It's fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
One of the things that he infers in this is that that the United States has made agreements with some of these folks. I don't know the terms of this, but there have been agreements between the government of the United States and some of these entities for different reasons. I don't know if it's for them to have resources, for them to do experimentation, for what. And I don't know what the exchange is, but even that, I mean, imagine finding out, here's this document between President Eisenhower, and that's the guy that they refer to, and these extraterrestrials. Like, I mean, I would keep rubbing my eyes expecting to wake up if we had that information in front of us. But it seems like this guy is very credible, and that might just, or something like it might just be true.
Yeah,
And, you know, even
I'm pretty
Go
sure
ahead.
that Eisenhower's granddaughter has actually confirmed that meeting between Eisenhower and extraterrestrials, I believe in 1956.
Right.
You might know better, but I believe that's the time. But anyway, yeah.
And even as I'm talking to you about this, I feel like I'm running, like you're all looking at me like I've lost my head. But it's really the stuff that's out there, and I don't know. I'm not here to be an advocate for what's actual fact and what's not, but this is what's emerging, and I think it's the things that we have to pay attention to, and be discerning to say, okay, that's not true. This is true, and this might be true. You know, don't take all of it, don't reject all of it, but be
Let me
discerning.
interject here a little bit. Let us get to questions, some other questions now that others might be having. Of course, Andrew and Marie, please feel free to keep asking questions. But there are, 23, 24 of us on tonight right now. Are there any questions that any of you have? Don't feel like, oh gosh, I don't even know what question to ask. Please feel very comfortable. Is there just something that you feel that you need to ask a question about? Something that seems maybe simple, but very, very important. Marcia.
Well, frankly, this is all really enlightening to me. I know very little about this, but I have to tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. And I'm just delighted to be hearing all of this. Find it fascinating and extraordinary. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia.
Yeah, we need to hear these things. We need to hear these things. Are there any other comments or questions from anyone? Holly. Unmute, dear.
Yes, thank you. I have been metaphysical all my life as far as knowing what's going to happen before it happens. I have seen spirit, which is just like a wisp that will go through the air. And my personal prayer isn't to a God in the sky that's going to cure all our ills. My personal prayer is to all those beings of wisdom, love, and light who are here sharing this nurturing earth plane with us. Because when you think about the earth and what a miraculous life support system it is, why should human beings and insects and fish and birds be the only creatures on it? To my way of thinking, we have been occupying this space with multidimensional beings. I used to do full moon drum circles at night, and we would take photographs in the dark of the circle and the people there. And when the photographs came out on the computer, we could see orbs, lots of orbs around us that weren't specks of dust or insects flying around. Now, I have no problem coexisting on this planet with other entities, multidimensional entities that are here because the planet itself is such a phenomenal life support system in the universe. It's a miracle that it exists. So this whole idea of coexistence, yeah, we've got dingbats who can't accept their neighbor because their neighbor's skin's a different color, but the whole idea of existing on this planet with multidimensional beings is something I think it's time our whole humanity around the world begins to accept. And it's not exactly a question, but I am curious about the communications between these interdimensional beings and responsible people around the world. I am curious what people know about these conversations, and will they come out in the hearings? Thank you.
John, I'm going to ask, if you would respond to that, and Connie, hold off. We'll come to Connie in just a moment. But John, would you talk to that notion of coexistence?
I
in
think,
communication?
yeah, I would be happy to. Holly, I appreciate what you said. That you've kind of lived in that space for a long time. I think all of us would be well served to start thinking that way now, if we're not already. And I think most of us do on some level. But I think that that's the essence. I'm not trying to put all of this on Grusch, but he is this very solid guy that's come forward and indicated that's essentially what very likely may be going on, that we are right now here as we sit here coexisting in the space that we occupy with other intelligent entities, or as they call them now, non-human intelligence. That it just seems very real to me. And for those of us who are open to this idea, it still takes a little bit of warming up to the idea, knowing that it's a reality. But I wonder about the folks that have no sense of this at all, and at some point are going to be confronted with that reality. Now, about the hearings, it's being very closely guarded what they're going to talk about, who the witnesses are going to be, actual names. I do know that the intent of the people that are running the hearings, including Gillibrand and Rubio and the people in the House side of things, their intention is to get this out there, to get as much information out to the public as absolutely possible. I don't know that we're going to get all of it in a public hearing. Some of it may just be, reserved for a classified hearing, which really doesn't do the public any good. And we're then relying on others to filter it out to us. Those who are on the side of we can't tell people, are like, we couldn't handle it. The population couldn't handle the information. It's too big. And it would blow our minds. I don't think that's true. And I think a lot of people in Congress are coming to the conclusion that that's not true either, that we're all ready for this. We're all ready. It might be shocking. It might be big. There might be a lot of head scratching, but I think we're ready for this. I think again, Vince, this is where I think your perspective would be very welcome from an evolutionary standpoint, spiritually, physically, all of this, intellectually. I think we're ready for this next step. And maybe that's what this has all been in anticipation of, for us to get to the point where we're ready to deal with this in a way that will not be disastrous, that we can do it in a way that will be beneficial to humanity, that those things that we were talking about, whether it's energy sources or whatever, or just knowledge, just plain and simple knowledge, we've come to the point that we're ready for that. That's how I feel.
Well,
We'll see what happens on the 26th.
This notion of coexistence, that's a very strong term. It kind of gets to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
Coexistence. It's a very, very important term. Let me just ask the question, does anyone else want to speak to that on the notion of coexistence?
I'd just like to add briefly that my idea of the coexistence is it's already been happening for eons. And we are only just becoming aware of it. So it has to do with changing our perception. And I'm not sure how it's hard enough in politics to change anyone's perception, but there's something about changing the acceptance to allow for the perspective that this has been existing and it's all been okay so far.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be happy to weigh in a little bit on that, but let me go to Connie first. Thank you, Holly, for sharing that. Connie, go ahead.
I really enjoyed the presentation. My son had an incident when he was growing up with ET, and it was really difficult trying to deal with it with my limited awareness of it. Is there any material that's like a basic understanding that I can look up on this subject?
Oh, Connie, there's so much information. There's a lot of, I'll say this, There's a lot of good information. There's also a lot of bad information. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not very good. So I would be happy to, maybe put together a little recommendation of a few things that might be interesting to you. I guess what I would like to know is if you just want sort of an opening to this topic. I have some books that I could certainly recommend to you, and I'd be happy to do that. If you'd like me just to forward that on to you, Vince, if that would be okay with you, I'll just send those to Connie. There are books, there are articles, and there are a number of really good podcasts. And Connie, if I could just recommend one, I've recommended this before. I really like, it's called the UFO Rabbit Hole Podcast, and the host is a young lady from Akron. She's extremely smart, very well researched. She doesn't engage in a lot of conspiracy theories and that sort of thing, which I really appreciate. It's called the UFO Rabbit Hole with Kelly Chase, and I'll send you a link to that if you'd like, because it's a wonderful series, and she's been commenting even as this revelation has come out. She's been providing pieces of information, so I'd be happy to send that to you if you'd like. I have your email address, I believe.
Thank you.
Connie Quednow.
Yes.
Tara, I think you had a comment.
I was just hoping that John would be able to just put together a reference sheet like that podcast and the different people. And the other two gentlemen, Andrew and Tony, maybe they could collaborate or send their information to John. But if John could pass that over to Vince, you could put that on the site or send it out. I think there are a lot of people that could benefit from having that. I certainly would look into it, but people that aren't on here tonight, people that I know that would be interested, I really almost feel like to be a responsible citizen would be to start trying to get this information out. I doubt there's very, very few people out there right now that even know that these hearings are going to take place. And I just really appreciate John bringing that forward.
Sure, I'd be happy. Also, Vince, I'll send you the information if you'd like me to do that. And you can,
And I'm not opposed to doing that, but I just want to ask, how many of you read our last Cosmic Citizens report? Did you take the time to read it? Because much of the information that John has presented was in our last Cosmic Citizens report. So I just want to make sure that, we don't want to put extra burdens on very busy people. But if we can do something that is more on a contemporary basis about what things might happen with David Grusch and the hearing, I'm okay with that. But I'm not going to have someone duplicate what's been on a Cosmic Citizens report. So I just want to make sure that we have so much information already in our Cosmic Citizens Committee reports. Just go to our website, click on Cosmic Citizens Committee reports. And the last one that John did was terrific. It was the background of really bringing us up to date. But to go forward, I think that might be something a little more to the point. Perhaps we could see what might happen from the situation on the 26th, and then maybe we can take that forward. I think until we do that, we get into, it could be this, it could be that, and I don't think that does as well. But I thought John's report was so good with a really good background. Maybe going forward, we'll take a better look over the next 2 or 3 months and see what emerges. I think we're served better with that than maybe this or maybe that. So I'm going to just suggest that as a guideline for us.
Vince, if I could just weigh in on that,
Sure.
Thank you for saying that. And I really enjoyed the Cosmic Citizens report. I always enjoy doing that. If I could just recommend, if you don't do anything at all, on the report, there's a link to the interview with Gary Nolan. And I think that you can do that tonight, even after we get off this call, and check out what he's all about. I think it's about I don't know, it's not very long, maybe
14 minutes.
Yeah.
14 minutes. And there's another review on there also, another interview with the Harvard project, the Galileo project.
Yes.
So this is what I would suggest. You go to our tab on our website, Cosmic Citizens Committee. It'll be the last report done by John. And as you read the report, you'll notice there are two nice videos at the bottom that you can click on, one with Dr. Nolan, the other with a gentleman from the Galileo Project. I'm forgetting his name right now.
Avi Loeb.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Mhm. And then we'll take a look and see what's going forward. And I think, John, you would be more inclined, I think, to, rather than just giving background, to be able to look at what might be going forward. I think that would be a great
Sure.
service to Now Creations. Thank you, John, for mentioning those two videos on the CCC report. Tara, and we have, I think there are, excuse me, we have 7 or 8, 6 or 7 Cosmic Citizens Committee reports. They're all interesting. Terry Riley. Unmute, dear. Your hand's up, Terry, but you're not unmuted yet. There you go.
Sorry, yep. This is Nancy. I'm
Oh, Nancy. Oh, okay.
Thanks, John. Just incredible, fascinating information. I'm totally new to it. Limited, very limited in my knowledge, but fascinated. I wondered, because you had referenced, investigation with what they have found and like the research into the things. I don't know exactly what to coin them, but what do they look like? What are they? What are you understanding that these beings or whatever look like? Do they have, physical characteristics that we as humans do, or what? What is that about?
Well, I won't speculate. I'll speak strictly to what Grusch said. And he didn't really provide any direct information about the physicality of, let's call them the bodies. What he did provide in his interview is a description of the craft that have been discovered or that have been recovered. Not so much about them. One, he said, is about the size of a football field. That was one description that he gave. The other thing is, he was asked, how do we know that these things aren't, made somewhere in China or in Russia or something? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but basically the composition of the materials that these craft have are absolutely unexplainable from a human standpoint. Like, we have no idea how these things are made. We have them, but when they start to drill down on what it is and what it's made of metals that we just couldn't recreate it here on Earth. And that's really kind of a teaser, because that's about as much as we know. That's about all he said. He didn't really go into much more description than that. And in fact, at one point, he still, even though he came forward, he still has an obligation to remain levels of confidentiality about certain things. He can't disclose certain things, which might compromise, sources, or compromise the security of the United States. So it's weird, because the Defense Department authorized him to do a certain level of speaking, but they also said, you can't disclose these particular details. And that's actually one of the things that he could not disclose, is what they think the materials are or what the bodies look like.
John, excuse me, from your reading in the past and so on, would you care to give a fairly informed speculation of what the bodies might be?
Well, yeah, I mean, if in the world of speculation, I mean, most people who have had an encounter with entities kind of describe these, you've probably seen it, the picture of the sort of the thin, small beings with very large heads and very large eyes, very thin mouth, not much of a nose. But there are all kinds of descriptions. There are people who have seen, and I guess this speaks to the idea that there's probably not just one species here. There are the folks that say they look like, they look Nordic in their appearance, or there are some who say that there are those who have sort of a lizard appearance. we don't know. We've heard anecdotal testimonies from people who say, this is what I saw. Probably the largest one that we see kind of more consistently and around the world are what they call the grays. That's the term that's used, the grays. That's what was perceived to have been crashed at Roswell. The grays, the large head, the eyes, and the thin mouth. So this kind of opens up a whole other question. Why would something from another dimension kind of resemble us? That's just a really good question. I don't know why. In all the ways things can evolve, why would something from another place, whether in time or space or dimension, end up looking like us? And I think that's a really worthy question that we just don't have the answer to right now.
So John, when they say the grays, is that because there's kind of a gray cast to their
Yes.
body?
Yeah, they generally tend, you know what? Let me see what I can do here, Vince. Let me see if I can pull up a picture. Yeah, there's a book by Whitley Strieber called Communion. It's a very good book about a firsthand experience.
What was the name of the book again, please?
It's called Communion.
Communion.
Yes, Whitley Strieber was a Hollywood writer. He was a writer, he was a director. He wrote this book about his own personal experience of being abducted in 1986. And Whitley Strieber is also, in my opinion, a very credible guy. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to show you the cover of the book. I read it when I was a young guy, and it scared me to death, but it's a really good book. It didn't scare me because there's anything terrible in it. Well, there are a few terrible things, but just the idea of being taken out of your bed was terrifying. Let me see here. Here's the picture. This is roughly, everybody see that? You've probably seen that in popular culture. They tend to be gray in color. Some people say they're wearing a very thin suit. Some people say it's actually their flesh. I mean, who knows? Hopefully we'll know more in a couple of months. But yeah, they tend to be small in stature, but some have described them as being 7 feet tall too.
Well,
If you saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind at the end of the movie, there they are.
we often describe ourselves as having an earth suit, our bodies, so that when we talk about the human perspective, again, the ontological shift or the ontological shock. Ontological just means the study of being. That's what ontology means, the study of being, which means it can include anything, quite frankly. But the ontological shock, I think what's interesting is when we ourselves have made the shift in identity from simply seeing ourselves as a physical human being to seeing ourselves as a soul, spirit, spiritual being, we have made that shift ourselves, quite frankly. So
Yeah.
I don't think the shift is going to be quite as remarkable maybe as we might think, because we less and less identify ourselves with the physical and much more with the conscious soul spirit, so that our biology is functioning much more from a spiritual standpoint. And of course, the Course in Mastering Alchemy has had a huge impact on us. We talked about actually in this morning's Sunday service and yesterday's workshop, spiritual biology. This is a huge thing coming to us. Andrew, go ahead. Thank you, John. One word. Okay. Andrew, go ahead, please.
Speaking a fair amount, so please tell me to stop if I am speaking too much. But I did want to quickly say something about the Whitley Strieber piece. That Whitley Strieber has actually written many books since his first communion, and he actually acknowledges now in retrospect that in the beginning of his experience, in the first few years with extraterrestrials, he came from a very fear-based space. So his books are actually written in that energy. So I would just warn folks, if you're going to read or explore his early work, he has since, I believe it was sometime in the aughts, had a very spiritual, transformational spiritual experience, which actually included these beings. And now his understanding is very different than it was back in the 80s. So just want to throw that out there.
Thank you for sharing that, Andrew.
If I can touch on that,
Sure,
if you don't mind. Yes, I agree with that. When I read it back in 1987 or whatever, it was quite fearful because it had just happened to him. He had no context for it. Over time, he has done a lot of, had a more spiritual understanding, and he has a book out that came out not too long ago called Them. I don't know if you've, I just actually listened to the audiobook, and it's really a wonderful book. His wife died about 7 or 8 years ago, and she was his partner. And anyway, I won't go into the whole review of the book, but it's a really good parallel or I guess comparison to the initial book, where he has just much greater wisdom around the topic.
And you said it was titled Them, THEM?
Yes, it's essentially the first part of the THEM. The first part of the book is essentially all the letters that were written to him after his first book was published, and the experiences that people shared with him that he didn't want anything to do with. Basically, he didn't want to know about that, but his wife kept the letters, and then they gradually went through them and just shared these experiences. And so a number of these experiences are shared. And then the second part of the book is, to Andrew's point, kind of his coming to terms in his later years with these entities, let's call them, these beings, because he's had a number of experiences since then.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, John. Tony. And Tony, stay up front. When you're closer to your device, it's easier to hear.
Okay, yeah, we're talking about what the appearance of these beings might be. That Gary Nolan interview that I referenced earlier, it's not the one that's on the last report. It's the interview that happened. It's a YouTube interview. I think even Tucker Carlson, hopefully that doesn't dissuade anybody from looking at it, but it's a Tucker Carlson interview with Gary Nolan. He references this question as to what they might look like. And he gives a very, very interesting explanation, his opinion. But I am taken back to a statement I heard some time ago regarding our need to understand what God might look like. And the saying goes something to the effect is if horses had gods, they would look like horses. And so it is, the idea is that if higher intelligence exists, and I believe it does, if it's going to communicate with us, they may attempt to look like us so that the communication may be more palatable to us, as opposed to looking like an alien from a foreign movie. So anyway, I encourage you, that Gary Nolan interview is very informative about his early steps into this whole thing.
It's pretty slick understanding about the horses. Sally. Unmute, dear.
What sorts of communication has been attempted? When you say, just how do they communicate with us?
Well, there are a lot of answers to that, Sally, but in a nutshell, I'm trying to pare this down to the essence. What you find in a lot of the reports that people have given, people who have had experiences or abductions, is that these communications tend to take place telepathically. So there's not necessarily a language exchange, but there's definitely a communication with words, with feelings that comes entirely telepathically.
If I do not have telepathic gifts at this time, and I encountered an ET, I would find that I do have telepathic gifts. Is that what you're saying?
That is true. That is these people who report this are not people who necessarily have said that they had that experience any other time in their life, but these beings communicate directly to them telepathically.
Not unlike Robert Monroe when he talked about his inspect friend, where all of a sudden Monroe with the inspect friend, the non-physical entity, the two of them were telepathic. They could read each other's mind.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I mean, that's kind of the general theme. Of course, there are all kinds of variations on that, but the general theme from people is that these communications happen in a telepathic manner.
That's a good point, Sally, you made too. Hitherto, you perhaps maybe never thought you were telepathic, but all of a sudden you encounter a being and there's a telepathy that was a gift you always had. It's pretty interesting.
Mhm.
Hopefully that reduces maybe a fear factor in some way.
Mhm.
Holly,
I wanted to ask if you have any information about what I've read about called indigo children, crystal children, star children, which are human beings being born in the recent 20, 30 years up to today, whose DNA seems to allow them for a broader receptivity of not just our normal five senses, but our sixth, seventh, and eighth senses, and that their awareness of quote unquote interdimensionality is more heightened, and their intelligence is in a different on a different plane from our normal IQ test intelligence. Can you speak to that as far as what these interdimensional beings may have to offer?
I can, and I'm going to echo Vince here and say, our good friend Doug Davis, who is also part of the Cosmic Citizens Committee, did a terrific write-up on indigo children and crystal children and rainbow children. He knows this stuff like the back of his hand. It's a little bit outside of my scope. I think it's incredibly interesting and really valuable. Doug knows it like the back of his hand. And I think that Cosmic Citizens report that Doug did is, I believe it's on the website. I think all the
It's on the
reports are on the
website.
website. So I would just really encourage you to go look up his report because it's excellent. And it really taught me, not just in reading it, but talking to Doug about it, because he's very passionate about it. He has a lot of information and a lot of wisdom, and it comes through in the report. So I would say, absolutely check it out. It's a good read.
Now, our Cosmic
Thank
Citizen
you.
reports have been excellent. And I just encourage you, we send it out by way of an email, but you need to read them. Not just Holly, but all of us need to read them. And they're all now archived on our website. So I think there's 6 or 7, and we have a couple more on the way, that's for sure. Are there any other comments? We have time for 1 or 2 questions or comments you might want to make tonight.
Well, thank you. I will be looking up your reports on that. Just a PS, I'm Bob Dove's sister, and he's the one who turned me on to your Now Creations webpage, and I'm enjoying your Sunday services.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Holly. I saw the name Dove, and I wasn't sure where Holly fit into that, but thank you, dear. Yeah, wonderful. John, I have one question for you. Is the hearing on the 26th, is it, I think you mentioned in the House of Representatives, and you mentioned a couple of the senators, is it a joint hearing?
No, it's a hearing in the House. There are things happening along parallel lines, but this particular hearing is in the House.
It's going to be in the House. And Schumer's point in the Senate?
He's pushing legislation for transparency. So in the 2024 Defense Authorization Act, he's pushing for that to become, to put language in there that will promote transparency around this subject. It's in the news. If you want to look it up, if anybody, I know we're kind of short on time, but if anybody would just wants to go on the news and Google Schumer UFO, it'll come right up.
Thank you.
One of the main things they're pushing for is basically any military whistleblowers that come out with this information can be protected once because many of them don't, because they're scared of what happens if they do.
Right. Well, let me just kind of in closing, first of all, thank you, John, for just a lovely presentation as usual, very informative for us. And we just appreciate your background, broad scope to everything. And I thank all of you for joining. We all provide an energy for these things to occur. And we just realize that whatever the situations are in life, you're perfectly safe and secure as an eternal soul spirit in the vibration of love. Keep that first and foremost. No matter what happens, you're just fine. John, do you have a comment you'd like to make in closing?
Yeah, I just really briefly in the chat, I put my email address and I just put it there in case anybody has a question or whatever. you know, I'm perfectly willing to answer questions and would engage a conversation if you wanted to, but my email's in the chat. I'm happy to respond to your emails. That's all I wanted to say, Vince.
And John, you're in our members directory also as
As
well.
well.
So please feel very comfortable to call upon John. Let me thank everyone. Marcia, go ahead, dear.
I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for bringing such a brilliant something to all of us. Thank you. That was just incredible. The
Thank you.
program.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew did not see John's email. John, do you want to maybe put it in again?
Oh, sure. Yes, I'll be happy to do that.
Sure.
I'm technologically challenged here, so hold on. Just take 1 second.
Take your time. Take your time. We've really had quite a weekend for Now Creations with our invocation to the unified chakra yesterday, tonight's presentation, this morning, Sunday service on spiritual biology. Pretty in-depth material. Tony, go ahead, please.
Yeah, for Holly, I believe it is. The report that you'd want to look at for the Star Children is report number 6.
Thank you. Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Tony.
you.
Sure.
So let's close as we normally do. I am an eternal being of light and love. Thus, only good can come to me, and only good can come from me. And we are eternal beings of light and love. Thus, only good can come to us, and only good can come from us. Namaste.